Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me on the Royal House of Ra. I am your host, Amenhotep Khufu El Ra. Today's show is going to be about, it's episode 20, and the show is going to be about the 19th dynasty. So we're going to talk about the pharaohs of the 19th dynasty and the contributions the 19th dynasty made towards the New Kingdom period. So this is a fascinating dynasty because there's 8 pharaohs of this dynasty, and the pharaohs of this dynasty had contributed tremendously to the empire age of Kemet. So as I did with the last episode 19, where I had discussed about the 18th dynasty, because I did that for the 18th dynasty in episode 18 and 19. And I'm going to do this again for episode 20 and 21, where I'm going to do a part 1 and part 2. The first part will be discussing the first 4 pharaohs of the 19th dynasty, and those pharaohs are Ramses the First, Seti the First, Ramses II, and Merneptah. So these are the 4 pharaohs that we're going to first discuss about in the 19th dynasty. And then part 2 we'll discuss about the other 4 pharaohs of that dynasty. So before we move any further, what I would like to say to all of my supporters, thank you for supporting this channel. Continue to support this channel. As I mentioned many times before, it doesn't cost you anything. Please like this channel, because this helps our channel here on YouTube, and also subscribe and share the content as well. I hope everyone enjoyed their work week, and looking forward for their weekend. But let's get into the 20th dynasty and the pharaohs of this dynasty and their contributions, because their contributions to Kemet was enormous. A lot of great things here, a lot of military campaigns, new developments, and architecture. So many things happened during this particular period of the New Kingdom, which is, I mentioned before, the New Kingdom is known as the Age of Empire in Kemet. So we're going to get into that. So excuse me, let's get into this now. Ramses the First reigned 1293 to 1291 BC, and Seti the First reigned 1291 to 1278 BC. Okay, so we're going to start out with Ramses the First, and the 19th dynasty was between 1293 to 1185 BC. The 19th dynasty, despite its latter luminaries, began on a fairly low note. Ramses I, from whom the main part of the period takes its name, Ramses, came to be pharaoh almost by default. He was previously the vizier, close friend, and confidant of the pharaoh Merneptah who, having failed to produce an heir, appears to have bestowed the succession on his comrade. Ramses must have been of advanced age, probably into his 50s, and was not of royal blood. He was a career army officer, the son of the troop commander Seti. Their family came from the northern eastern delta area of Avaris, the capital of the Hyksos invaders of 400 years earlier. The short reign of Ramses I, probably only about 2 years, gave him hardly any time to make his mark on history. There are some reliefs on the second paion at Karnak, and a still dated early in his second regional year found at Wada Hafa. His small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV 16, was found by Belzoni on 10th 11th October 1817, and showed all the signs of a hasty interment. The burial chamber was unfinished. In fact, it had been intended to be merely an antechamber to a much larger tomb. As so often the tomb had been robbed in antiquity, although some of the burial provisions still remain, notably the large granite sarcophagus, a pair of almost 6.5 feet, 2 meters high wooden statues of the king, once covered with thin gold foil, and a number of wooden statuettes of underworld deities with curious animal heads. Robbers had damaged the sarcophagus as they prized the lid off, and there is evidence that they actually hurled some of the smaller statuettes against the tomb walls in destructive fury, since tiny silvers of gold foil have been observed attached to the painted plaster. Ramses' mummy may not have survived. It certainly has not been identified, although it does appear to have been taken from the tomb before 968 BC, around the time when a number of the royal mummies were being moved to safety, eventually to be deposited in the tombs of Amenhotep II, KV 35. Now, KV means King Valley, and Queen Inhapi. Okay, the burial of Ramses' wife, Queen Seti, broke with earlier traditions, where the queen was apparently buried in her husband's tomb at a late date, if she outlived him. Seti's tomb set a new precedent. It was placed in what is now known as the Valley of the Queens at Thebes. Like her husband's tomb, Seti, QV, stands for Queen's Valley, 38, was unfinished, with only a few paintings on the walls of the first chamber. Okay, so as is stated, he didn't rule for so long. He only had a 2-year reign, so he didn't really make an impact. He was a vizier under the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, Pharaoh Horemheb, and Horemheb did not have any heirs. So it seems like that Horemheb had gave his blessings for Ramses to rule after him. So Ramses I was the founder of this dynasty, the 19th dynasty, and his family came from the region that was once ruled by the Hyksos and Avaris. I'm not sure they're Hyksos, but I believe they are Kemetans. So you can go into that in a further date. Now, let me say this before I go on to Sethi the First. I find this kind of disturbing that every time you hear that when these pharaohs died, that the tombs seem to be constantly robbed by these tomb robbers, and then when they rob them, they do significant damages to these tombs, and it sounds like they do it out of despite. I don't know what was going on at that time and why these people were doing this. Well, it was evident why they were doing it. It was stealing, but was it necessary to go any further to create damage? I don't know. It was a personal thing. Maybe if we can do some research on that and find out what happened and what caused these people to go to this extreme. But let's get into Sethi the First here. Sethi the First had held the same titles of vizier and troop commander as his father Ramses the First, whom he rapidly succeeded. In order to restore Kemetan fortunes after the instability under the Amarna kings, he inaugurated a policy of major building at home and a committed foreign policy abroad. He took the additional title of repeater of birth, signifying the beginning of a new and legitimate era. It was indeed a period of rebirth for Kemet, and during Seti's 13-year reign, Kemetan art and culture achieved a maturity and sophistication that were scarcely equaled in later centuries. Seti married within his own military caste, choosing Tuya, the daughter of a lieutenant of charity, Rahi. Their first child was a boy who died young, and their second, a daughter, Tia. Their third, another boy, took his grandfather's name and later became Kemet's mightiest pharaoh, Ramses II. A second daughter born much later was called Hinut Mare, and she was to become a minor queen of her elder brother in due course. Seti's military campaigns. Seti led a military expedition into Syria as early as the first year of his reign. The records of this campaign and several subsequent ones over at least the initial 6 years of Seti's rule are preserved on the outer north and east walls of the great temple of Amun at Karnak. They follow a basic pattern of the army on the march, where Seti followed his predecessor Thutmose III tactic of swift movement up through the Gaza Strip and Palestinian coast, thereby securing his flank and supply lines by sea into Phoenician ports. Fortresses are shown being attacked and Syrians captured, bound, and carried off, the whole culminating in a huge representation of prisoners being slain before Amun. Other campaigns were waged against the Libyans of the Western Desert, and there was a renewed attack upon Syria and Lebanon, where for the first time Kemetans met Hittite in battle. One scene at Karnak shows the capture of Kadesh that was to be the focus of the famous battle in later years under Seti's son Ramses II. All the while Seti was enduring to restore the past glories of the earlier 18th dynasty pharaohs Thutmose III and Amenhotep III. a high point of Kemetan art. During Seti's reign, some tremendous building projects were undertaken. The quality of the reliefs that embellish new cult temples and his tomb are virtually unsurpassed in Kemetan art. At Karnak, where his victories were chronicled, Seti began the work of building the great hypostyle hall in the temple of Amun that was to be completed by his son Ramses. One of the wonders of ancient architecture and planning, the hall covers an area of 335 by 174 feet, 102 by 53 meters, and has 134 gigantic columns, of which the inner 12 slightly higher than the outer rows at 75 feet, 20 meters in height, had clerestory lighting, stone grills through which the only light entered the hall. Seti's reliefs are on the north side and contrast in their fine style with the later additions. At Abydos, the ancient cult center of the god Osiris, Seti built what is undoubtedly the most remarkable decorated temple amongst all those of ancient Kemet. Its construction indicates Seti's determination to demonstrate his devotion to Kemet's most popular deity and to link himself with the distinct origins of Kemetan monarchy. Unusually, the temple has 7 sanctuaries dedicated for the deity Seti himself, who died during its construction. Pa, Re, Harakti, Amun-Re, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. In the main hall, the superb relief shows the king officiating in the temple as priest, offering to the god in his shrine and carrying out all the necessary daily functions of the priestly office in the service of the god. One part of Abydos temple of particular interest and importance is the so-called Hall of Records, or Gallery of Lists. Here, Seti is shown with the young Ramses before long official lists of the pharaohs from the earliest times to his own reign. It is notable that the names of the Amarna pharaohs are completely omitted, as if they did not exist in Kemetan history. The cartouche sequence jumps from Amenhotep III directly to Horeb in the desert at the rear of the great temple at Abydos. Seti built a most enigmatic structure known as the Ossuarum. It is set at a lower level than the main temple and now subject to almost continual flooding because of the high water table, and was originally entered through a long tunnel covered with painted scenes from the Book of Gates. The tunnel leads eventually to a huge hall, 100 by 65 feet, 30 by 20 meters. This hall was the focal point of the building, and it was here that the body of Seti, together with his funerary equipment, rested before being taken for burial in the Valley of the Kings. The whole structure underground with a central mound surrounded by canal water reflected the origins of life from the primeval waters. Apart from a small temple at Abydos dedicated to Seti's father, Ramses the First, and his own mortuary temple at Thebes, now largely destroyed, the ultimate building of Seti's reign was his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV 17. Discovered by Giovanni Belzoni in October 1817, it is without doubt the finest in the valley, as well as being the largest and deepest, both measurements being over 300 feet or 100 meters. The workmanship in the decorations is superb, with finely delineated low reliefs and vibrant colors. In the burial hall, Belzoni found the magnificent translucent alabaster sarcophagus of the king, which, as Belzoni remarked, merits the most particular attention, not having its equal in the world. The lower box or chest was largely intact, but the sculpted lid with the recumbent figure of Seti had been badly smashed by ancient robbers, and its pieces lay round about. Inside and out, the sarcophagus is carved with hieroglyphs, quote-unquote Merneptah, once filled with blue-green paint. On the floor of the chest and the outside of the lid are texts from the Book of Coming Forth by Day, and on the inside walls and the exterior from the Book of Gates. Seti's mummy, the finest of the surviving royal mummies, shows a noble face. It was not found in his tomb, but was amongst the great royal cache of mummies revealed at Deir el-Bahari in 1881. A number of dockets on the mummy record that before reaching its final resting place, it had been restored during the reign of the high priest of Amun, Hathor, 1080 to 1074 BC. Presumably after the first robbery in the tomb, then again about year 15 of Semendis, 1054 BC. After this, Seti's mummy was joined in his tomb for a short while by that of his son Ramses II, before both were finally hidden in the Deir el-Bahari tomb. DB 320 in year 10 of Samon, 968 BC. Okay, so that's where you have it between Seti. Now, Seti was a great military, he was a warring king, great military commander, and he was the one who was the architect of the new Kemetan art scene, as towards great buildings and artwork, was during his reign. So he played a very significant role in Kemet during the New Kingdom period. Now we're going to go with his son, Ramses II, who was the third king of this dynasty, and he reigned in 1279 to 1212 BC. Ramses II, who ascended to power at the age of 25, can rightly be said to merit his popular title, Ramses the Great. During his long reign of 67 years, everything was done on a grand scale. No other pharaoh constructed so many temples or erected so many colossal statues and obelisks. No other pharaoh sired so many children. Ramses The victory over the Hittites at Kadesh was celebrated in one of the most repeated Kemetan texts ever put on record. By the time he died, aged more than 90, he had set his stamp indelibly on the face of Kemet. As a young prince, Ramses was imbued with the military traditions established by his grandfather, after whom he was named. From his earliest years, all hopes for the new dynasty were pinned on him. At the age of 10, he was recognized as eldest king's son by title, despite there being no other, his elder brother having died long before. And by his mid-teens, he found associated with Seti as a diminutive figure in the reliefs of the Libyan campaigns at Karnak. Ramses was allowed to participate in Seti's subsequent campaigns against the Hittites in Syria. The young prince rode well in harness alongside his experienced father, learning his trade of statecraft. Ramses is often found revered to in inscriptions overseeing the cutting of obelisks from the granite quarries at Aswan, involved in Seti's great building projects, and also inaugurating his own smaller temple to Osiris at Abydos. Many inscriptions of up and coming young men attest to Seti's keen and acute eye in spotting the high flyers who were to grow up alongside Ramses and serve him well in his turn, although he outlived most of them. The royal wives. The youthful Ramses took his two principal wives, Nefertari and Is-Nofret, at least 10 years before Seti's death. The old king thus saw his grandchildren around him, at least 5 sons and 2 daughters by them, as well as possibly another 10 to 15 children from other ladies of the harem. No wonder that in later years and after further marriages, Ramses could boast of over 100 sons and daughters that simply were not numbered. Virtually nothing is known of the background of either Nefertari or Is-Nofret, except that Nefertari was always the chief queen until her death in about year 24 of the reign. Her recently restored tomb in the Valley of the Queens, QV 66, is one of the wonders of ancient Thebes. Nusret took Nefertari's place, but only for some 10 years, as she seems to have died about year 34. Nefertari bore Ramses' first son, the crown prince Amun. This name is going to be, I don't want to botch it, but I'm going to try my best. Amun Herkhotshef, and at least 3 other sons and 2 daughters. Is-Nofret bore a son named Ramses, plus 2 other important sons. Kamwazet and Merneptah, the king's eventual successor. Kamwazet later became famous as a magician and is often referred to today as the first archaeologist, thanks to his interest in ancient monuments and their restoration. The 5th dynasty pyramid of the Yunus at Saqqara first example bears his inscription high up on the south face. Following royal custom, Ramses took many of his other and subsequent wives from his immediate family. They included Hinut-Mare, his younger sister, and 3 of his daughters. Mara-Yet-Amun bint Anath, distinctly Syrian name meaning daughter of Anath, which is curious since her mother was in Nufre, and Netpetaway. After peace had been concluded with the Hittites, Ramses cemented the new alliance by taking a Hittite princess as his bride, given the Kemetan name Morat Tha Nefre. 7 years later, in 1239 BC, a second Hittite princess joined the court. In his old age, Ramses' harem was nothing if not cosmopolitan, numbering another Hittite princess together with Syrian and Babylonian royal ladies. Okay, so at this time, this was a great, Ramses II he was a great military leader. He was a great leader. He did a lot of building in Kemet. One of the greatest leaders in ancient times, who made his mark not only as a great military leader and great statesman, but he also made contributions in temple building, art, and other things in Kemetic history. Now, also too, this was the age of now a lot of people say, well, the 19th dynasties, were their rulers really Kemites? They were, but you have to remember, race was not seen as it is today. So when they had these political marriages were done to keep peace. So they married foreign princes. So yes, you would see in this period some of the Kemetans were mulattoes. So some of the children were mulattoes. So they were still Kemetans. So this is where it comes in, where you see the lightening of the Kemetan aristocracy because of these political marriages. All right, so they were Kemetans, people who came from Africa. They were from Africa, but as I stated, political marriages was done at this time, and they didn't look at race as we do now. But they were Kemetans. These were people of African descent. So you're going to see some that may look light and fairer skinned because of these marriages. But the majority were of African tone and African phenotype. Okay, so let's go on to this. Now, the Hittite Wars. Relations with the Hittites on Kemet's Syrian frontier were far from friendly during the first part of Ramses' reign. In Seti's time, Kemet had kept her influence on the southern Phoenician coastline ports, while the Hittites retained the northern city of Kadesh. In year 4 of Ramses' reign, however, there was a revolt in the Levant, and in the spring of year 5, 1275 BC, the new king was forced to mobilize his army. Ramses gathered together one of the greatest forces of Kemetan troops ever seen, 20,000 men, basically in 4 divisions of 5,000, each named respectively after the gods Amun, Re, Ptah, and Seth. The following the virtually in Ramesses III footsteps of some 200 years earlier, Ramses moved up through the Gaza Strip and was about 10 miles from Kadesh in early May. With such a large army plus all the necessary accessories, elements, baggage, trains, and camp followers, progress was slow and extended over a vast area. 2 spies captured and interrogated on the approach to Kadesh indicated that the Hittite army was over 100 miles to the north. Ramses therefore moved forward confidently with the 1st Division Amun, crossed the river Ortens, and camped to the west of Kadesh, a city that had created strong defenses by diverting water through a canal from the river, making the city virtually an island. Ramses' complacency was soon shaken, however, when a forward patrol captured 2 more spies who revealed under torture that the previous pair had been a plant. The Hittite army was in fact just the other side of Kadesh, waiting in ambush. The Hittite king, Muwatalles, had assembled an army even greater than the Kemetan one, in 2 sections, each of about 18,000 and 19,000 men, plus 2,500 chariots. It was a formidable force, and it struck almost immediately at the Ray division coming up to join Ramses. The chariots swept through the Kemetan ranks, scattered the soldiery like chaff, and then plunged into the recently made camp. Confusion reigned, and Ramses found himself isolated, abandoned by all except his personal guard and shield bearer, Mena. Nevertheless, as a quick-witted commander, he rallied his few forces to resist the attack. He was saved from annihilation, or worse, captured by his elite guard, which, having taken a different route from the main army, came up rapidly and made a flank attack on the Hittites. Forced to flight on 2 fronts, Muwatalles retreated, and the quiet of night settled over the battlefield which Ramses occupied. The following day, the now reunited Kemetan forces attacked, but the outcome was virtually a stalemate. Ramses, however, did not view it as such. The pharaoh, young and remembering no doubt that his father Seti had not been able to hold Kadesh, reserved his options when Muwatalles proposed a peace. The Kemetan army marched home, and the status quo remained. Bombastic accounts of the battle and Ramses' personal bravery under the hand of Amun were later inscribed on the walls of the temple at Karnak, Luxor. 3 versions: the Ramesses twice and Ramses temples at Abydos, Abu's Symbol, and Dura. Many graphic incidents are illustrated in the reliefs: the charging charioteer, the heroic king, mercenaries in distinctive horned helmets, cutting off the right hands of the slain for accounting purposes, and ludicrously on the back of the 2nd pylon in the Ramessum, the fleeing prince of Aleppo, who tumbled into the Ordis, was fished out and suspended upside down by his adherents in an effort to drain him and bring him around. Accounts of the battle were also written in Merneptah on papyrus, often as schoolboy exercises, and embellished with drawings of spirited horses. Further campaigns were undertaken against the Hittites in subsequent years, but eventually Ramses realized that he could not hold the northern reaches of Syria, just as his opponents could not control the south. Internal troubles and a growing Assyrian menace to the east made the new Hittite king Hattusilus III realize that there was no point in the almost annual cat and mouse game with Kemet. He proposed a peace treaty. The outcome was termed agreed in year 21, 1259, essentially of mutual non-aggression and support. The treaty survives carved on the walls of Karnak and the Ramessses, and by one of those one of those consonants of fate in the Hittites version on clay tablets from Hattusis, the Hittites' capital. Perhaps not surprisingly, the two accounts do not quite agree. The Hittite sources say, for example, that it was Ramses who sued for peace. Letters and gifts were exchanged between the two royal families, and favorable situations obtained so much so that in 1246 Hattusilus III proposed an even closer link by offering one of his younger daughters to Ramses as wife. Her Kemetan name was Moat Hornefurure. There was a slight contempt over the size of the dowry to accompany the princess with Ramses, inconsequently pleading poverty and asking for more, but it was resolved and she joined the court. A second princess, Hattusilus' oldest daughter, was offered some 7 years later in 1239 and came to Kemet to join her sister. This new liaison was celebrated on marriage stills at Karnak, Eliphalet, Abu Simbel, and Amarna West. Ramses the Builder. Now, see, like I stated before, but these marriages were political. Now we're going to go into Ramses the Builder. Now he was a great builder and architect. He did tremendous buildings projects in Kemet with temples and other buildings, and we're going to go into these buildings and talk about that, and then we will go to the last pharaoh. Well, not the last pharaoh, but the fourth pharaoh of this dynasty. As a monument builder, Ramses II stands preeminent amongst the pharaohs of Kemet. Although Khufu had created the Great Pyramid, Ramses had laid over the whole land. True, he thought nothing of adding his name to another king's monuments and statues right back to the Middle Kingdom, so that nowadays the majority of cartouches seen on almost any monuments proclaimed his throne name. Mat of Re. The justice of Re is strong. Yet his genuine building achievements are on a Herculean scale. He added to the great temples at Karnak and Luxor, completed his father's Seti mortuary temple at Gornon, Thebes, and also his Abydos temple, and built his own temple nearby at Abydos. On the west bank at Thebes, he constructed a great mortuary temple, the Ramessses. Inscriptions in the sandstone quarries at Gabal el Salisa record at least 3,000 workmen employed there cutting stone for the Ramesses alone. Other major mortuary temples rose in Nubia at Beta el Wali, Gurf Hussein, Wada es Sabuya, Dur, and even as far south as Napata. Ramses' greatest building feat must be counted not one of these, but the carving of the mountainside of the two temples at Abu's Simbel in Nubia. The grandeur of the great temple is overwhelming, fronted as it is by four colossal 60 feet 18 meters high seated figures of the king that flank the entrance in two pairs. It is strange to reflect that the smaller temple dedicated to Hathor and Ramses' favorite queen Nefertari has lain open for centuries. The great temple was only rediscovered in 1813 by the Swiss explorer Jean-Louis Burckhardt and first entered by Giovanni Belzoni on 1st August 1817. A miracle of ancient engineering, its orientation was so exact that the rising sun at the equinox on 22nd February and 22nd October flooded directly through the great entrance to illuminate three of the four gods carved seated in the sanctuary over 200 feet 60 meters inside the mountain. The fourth of the seated god, Path, does not become illuminated, as apparently he is a god associated with the underworld. Nefertari was probably present at the dedication of the two Abu Simbel temples in year 24 and apparently died the following year, so at least she saw herself associated with her husband. In his greatest work, and lived to see the dedication of her temple, one of Ramses' preoccupations in all this building work was obviously the payment for it, and that meant gold. The precious metal is represented as being bought as tribute in many Theban nobles' tombs of the 18th and 19th dynasties, and a papyrus in the Turin Museum from the reign of Sethi the First actually shows a map of gold mines in the eastern desert. A lot of the wealth was also diverted into the cost of building a fine new city in the Delta Pi-Ramses domain of Ramses near modern Quentin. Embellished with great obelisks, Pi-Ramses became the wonder of the age. Though little Atlas remains today, and it was probably on such building works that the Hebrews were employed in the land of Goshen. The Exodus apparently took place from this era in about 1263 to 1262 BC year 17. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Kemet. Exodus 12 verse 41. Although a traumatic experience for the Jews and a major element in Judaism, it was not recognized as such in Kemet, and the only known reference to Israel in the Kemetan records occurs under Merneptah. Okay, now I have a problem with this because this is the story where the Jews were slaves in Kemet and they were harshly treated, and Moses came to save them and take them out of Kemet, and Moses was supposed to have said, let my people go, and then they crossed the Red Sea, and then Moses parted the Red Sea. We all know that story about Exodus. But from scholars that I have read and did research, especially scholars like John Henrik Clark, Dr. Ben, also Aswa Kwesi, also the well-known Cameroonian Dr. Shea Antadot did discoveries, and there's shown evidence that this did not occur. So, and even the Kemetans never record this. They recorded everything. Even they would record something like this, and they did not record this because it didn't happen. Now, others would say, yes, it did happen. So, I shouldn't say we don't want to go into spiritual, but we need to have facts and stop promoting these fantasies. So, with this inclusion, I'm going to go with the facts that the individuals, even Dr. Chancellor Williams also talked about this as well. I'm going to go with these scholars, what they said, and the research they done on the tremendous research they done on Kemet, and go with their facts. I'm not going to go with the Egyptologists and the current Jews like to perpetuate, but I'm going to stay with the facts that was given by the scholars that I have just mentioned, who had discussed this very topic here. So with that said, let's go into the death and burial of Ramses II. In year 67, 1212 BC, Ramses II, perhaps 92 years of age, was called to the west to join the gods. His tomb had long been prepared in the valley of the kings, KV7, and was as large, if not larger, in area than that of his father Sethi the First, although not so well decorated. Now it is much damaged and virtually inaccessible. The splendor of the contents of the tomb must have been incredible, if only by comparison with that of the tomb of the short-lived Tutankhamun. Few items, however, survive that can be associated with the burial. A wooden statuette of the king, it's in British museums, 4 pseudo-canopic jars, the Louvre, the upper half of a hollow cast, flattened bronze, Ushapti in Berlin, and 2 large wooden Hittites, Brooklyn, and British museums. The mummy of Ramses was found in the Great Cache of Royal Mummies at Deir el-Bahari in 1881. DB 320, a docket written in Hittite on the coffin in which he lay recorded that the body was moved in year 1054 BC of Smiths from its previous resting place to the tomb of his father Sethi the First, whence it was taken to its last secret hiding place. In 1976, the mummy was flown to Paris, where a great Ramses II expedition was staged. Deterioration had been noticed on the body, and the journey was also for Ramses to receive the best conservation treatment available. The mummy was examined by X-ray radiography, which revealed that Ramses' distinctively agile nose had retained its shape because the ancient embalmers had packed it full of peppercorn. Other noses of mummies tend to be flattened by the bandaging around them, as befitted visiting royalty. Although he had been dead for nearly 3,200 years, Ramses was greeted at the Paris airport by a full presidential guard of honor. Oh God, these Europeans. Now, we're going to talk about the fourth pharaoh of this dynasty, which is Merneptah, who reigned 1212 to 1202 BC. We're going to talk about him a little bit, and then we will end that. And then, as I mentioned, part 2, which would be Monday, March 21st, we will discuss about the last 4 pharaohs of Dynasty 19, and that would air 5 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Mountain Time, and 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Okay, so let's talk about the fourth pharaoh, not the last, but the fourth pharaoh of Dynasty 19. Merneptah. By the time that Merneptah, Ramses the 13th son, succeeded his long-lived father, he must have been into his 60s. Merneptah's 10-year reign is documented by 3 great inscriptions, some 80 lines on a wall in the temple of Amun at Karnak, a large still with 35 lines remaining from Atropos in the Delta, and the great victory still found by Flinders Petre in 1896 in Merneptah ruined mortuary temple at Thebes, consisting of 28 lines. All 3 relate to Merneptah's military campaigns and complements each other. For the last years of Ramses II, peace had reigned on the Kemetan frontiers and amongst the vassals, but times were changing. A flash revolt in southern Syria was quickly crushed. The Hittite king, now facing attacks on his northern territories and also famine through crop failure, invoked the old treaty of support, to which Merneptah responded by sending grain. once more, as in the biblical story, Kemet was a granary for the starving Near East. There was unrest on the western borders with the Libyans, who had been quietly infiltrating the delta, and in year 5, 1207 BC, attempted an invasion, fermenting revolt in Nubia and in the western oasis. Rapid mobilization and a heavy preemptive strike left the Libyans totally vanquished. The Karnak inscription records Merneptah valor and the slaughter Libyans slain whose uncircumcised pharaohs were carried off. 6,359. The Atlas still records only 6,200. Nubia has risen to support the Libyans, but so swift was the destruction of the latter that Merneptah could immediately turn south and inflict a crushing blow on the rebels. Merneptah, although elderly, had made the point that insurgents could not tamper with Kemet's security. Merneptah realized that his time on the throne might be short. He rapidly commenced building his mortuary temple on the edge of the desert at Thebes and his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Like many of his predecessors, he was not averse to using earlier buildings as a quarry. His masons turned to the nearby mortuary temple of Amenhotep III, now largely disused, and removed much of its, including the large stele that was turned round to take Merneptah's victory hymn. Merneptah's tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV8, lies close to that of his father, but at a slightly higher level, so it has not suffered the effects of flooding that assailed Ramses' tomb. Fragmentary remains of funerary equipment, including alabas, Abashaptus, have been recovered from the tomb, but the curious fact is that Merneptah apparently had several sarcophagus, each carved in various stones that included alabas, rose, and black granite. One of Merneptah's granite sarcophagus was found reused in the intact tomb of Pharaoh Persusnes in 1033 BC, discovered at Tanis in the Delta. Merneptah's mummy was not found in the tomb, parts of which may have been open for antiquity. Neither was it in the great cache of royal mummies discovered in 1881. His absence led many biblical scholars to underline the fact that he must have been the pharaoh of the Exodus and had perished in the Red Sea. His tomb was merely a cenotaph, since the body was not recovered. These arguments were confounded in 1898 when the mummy of Merneptah appeared among the 16 bodies found in the royal mummy cache concealed in the tomb of Amenhotep II, KV 35. There is some evidence that Merneptah Queen Isis Nefertari was also buried in his tomb rather than in the Valley of the Queens, and that she predeceased him, but her body has not been identified. Okay, so that is the end of the last. That was the fourth pharaoh of the fourth dynasty. Now he faced military incursions from the Libyans and the Nubians, and he also helped his ally, the Hittites, when they were suffering from their northern borders. And that was the northern borders that was during the time when the Assyrians were becoming a major player and they were becoming an empire. And they threatened the Hittites, and they finally defeated the Hittites and destroyed their civilization. But before that had happened, the battles with Assyria had weakened the Hittites, and the Hittites went through a great famine, and as Kemet being an ally had sent grain to help them. So now they also mentioned that in the last part of this that he possibly could be the pharaoh of the Exodus story, and that was why his body wasn't found in his tomb. But as we had mentioned earlier, from the beginning of the 19th dynasty, a lot of times what they did with these pharaohs' bodies was they would remove them from their tombs to protect their bodies from robbers. So they would put them in a pack with other kings to safeguard these bodies. And the same thing happened to him. That's why they didn't find his tomb. So they assumed he was the king of the Exodus, and he was not. So that is the end of part 1 of Dynasty 19. Now part 2, as I mentioned, would be talking about the last 4 pharaohs of the dynasty, and we would be talking about Ramesses, Sethi II, Merneptah, and Queen Tasre. She was the last ruler in the 19th dynasty. So those are the 4 last pharaohs of this dynasty that we're going to discuss on Monday the 24th. So look out for that. That's going to be a great show. I hope you enjoy today's show. Thank you for your support. Remember, click on to that like button because it helps this channel. Please support this channel because this channel is something that supports African history and the truth of Kemetic history. So once again, thank you all. Enjoy your afternoon, and I will look forward in hearing and seeing all of you next Monday. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day. God bless.